Hello everybody and welcome back. Well, it's been a busy few weeks. I've had some intermittent work travel, and in between all of that, I received a fairly large package in the mail. This 60-pound set of boxes is my first ever beehive. As I've said in previous videos, I'm very interested in harvesting some honey on my farm, and I'm using a very unique type of beehive called an Autoflow Beehive. These frames that you're looking at right here, these yellow things, are man-made frames, and when you twist a certain key in the top of them, the hives split where the honey is, and the honey flows out automatically without damaging the rest of the beehive. You close it up, and the bees go right back to processing. Now the second box is a beautiful box filled with cedar pieces. And let me tell you, if you like constructing things, you would be in heaven with all of these pieces. There's several individual sections to this beehive, and each section comes in individual pieces that must be assembled. Some of the pieces have windows, there's roofing pieces, some of the pieces are merely for weather stripping, some are for separating the boxes, and of course, there's a very simple basic set of instructions in not great English. So there's going to be a little bit of trial and error to get this beehive constructed. All in all, there's probably about 60 pieces of wood here. So aside from my little room here smelling fantastic like cedar, I'm in store for quite an assembly process. Fortunately, there's a lot of dovetails. There's mitered dovetails, there's straight dovetails or finger joints, and things only seem to go together one way. But as you all know, when you actually start putting things together, anything possible can go wrong. So, let's get started. I'm going to walk you through this entire process once I move all these pieces to the basement. So as you're watching this, you're seeing the glue up process. Everything is going to get glued with wood glue and then screwed together. Now, what I did not include in this video was probably an hour of sorting and dry fitting pieces together, because many of these pieces look very similar, and the instructions do not do a great job of identifying exactly which of these pieces, with very slight variations, go to which piece of the beehive. So this assembly that's taking place on the screen right now is for the very bottom box. This box is called the hive body, and this is where the bees do all of their bee business. They're not making honey in this box. This is where they live. So I guess this is a good place to point out that an Autoflow beehive, whether it's the brand name ones or these knockoff ones like the one that I'm building here, it's a variation of the classic Langstroth style beehive. They're called modified Langstroths. Basically, all the individual pieces are the same as a Langstroth, except there's some decorative elements such as a gabled roof. And then, of course, in the second box that I'm going to build, called the Super, this is where they make the honey, you have the flow frames, which are definitely not the traditional type of frames that are usually in a Langstroth box collecting honey. So a few things to note as you're watching this glue up process. These dovetails only fit one way, so boards can only be inserted one way in one direction, so you know that the pieces are always going together. Now, by and large, throughout this kit, these dovetails are incredibly tight. You really need a hammer, or a mallet I should say, to pound them in. Now, I already did a dry fit, so they've already been together once and they're a little bit looser. Please do not use a hammer or a mallet on the fingers of a dovetail. like I'm doing right here. I'm doing it because I've already put this together and they've loosened up. But if you do this on a fresh dovetail in one of these kits, which is very tight, you could very easily snap the finger off of the dovetail. So this is the first box completed. Now in this kit, they provided a bag of screws. They provided several different sizes and styles, and in the instructions it said to use screws as well as glue, but it did not indicate where the screws should go, how many screws you should use, what size screws from the kit you should use, or any of the details that maybe a novice would expect to see when assembling a wooden project. So because I always do things a little overkill, I'm literally drilling holes in every single one of the fingers of the dovetail and screwing them together. I want this to be a permanent assembly. I don't want to risk anything coming apart, and it really doesn't hurt anything to have screws all over the box. The only thing is, when you're screwing through a dovetail, be sure to pre-drill a pilot hole. Now another step that I did not show you here is that once all the glue dried, I filled everything in with wood filler, and then I'm doing the final sanding. Now the final sanding of these pieces is tricky because this is super fresh cedar. It's very sappy, so this gums up your sanding pads very quickly, very easily. One more thing to be aware of when sanding very sappy wood, such as this cedar. Going over sap with a sander will cause it to gum up on the wood and turn black. So you'll end up with these weird areas that look like black glue on the surface of the wood. If you are oiling or staining or polyurethaning the exterior of your box, you're going to want to be much more careful about how you sand this very fresh wood. I'm going to paint mine though, so it really doesn't matter. This is the second box called the Super, and as you can see, this is where the character of this kit starts to show. These pieces I just removed are what allows you to access the flow frames, the key area, as well as the tubes to release the honey. This box also has windows on the side. There's still a piece of plastic covering the window to keep it safe right now, which I will remove. The only thing to keep note of on this particular box is that not everything gets screwed in, because you have to be able to remove those certain panels to access the honey mechanisms. So be aware when you're doing the assembly of this particular piece. So while all of this work is taking place behind the scenes, this is probably a good time to show you the exact beehive that I purchased off Amazon. This is called the Golden Palace Autoflow Beehive, 7-piece set, and it was $360 when I purchased it. I went to camelcamel.com and I did see that the price fluctuates by about $10 a few times per year, so this is about an average price that you would pay for this. I'm going to put a link for this down in the description of my video. I should probably start doing affiliate links, because I always recommend products from Amazon. There's going to be several more products from Amazon that I'm going to talk about in this video, but no affiliate links here, just the direct link to Amazon. I ended up going with this particular model off Amazon because in doing some research on Google, this particular brand, Golden Palace, was reviewed by a lot of people, and there's a lot of videos about this on YouTube as well. Now here's the thing with these Autoflow beehives. There is a main company out of Australia, I believe, that designed this type of system. The company is called Hive, and I've mentioned Hive in different videos before. And Hive has a great product. They're very highly reviewed, and they have a lot of other features that this particular knockoff does not have. So the thing is, a flow hive costs about $900 and up, depending on features. This Autoflow Beehive costs about $360. So I could buy a few of these for the cost of one flow hive. So just looking at this from a dollars and cents perspective, for me, it seemed like the better value to get one of these imitation brands, mainly because this is my first beehive. I did an online course for beekeeping, and I really don't know much other than what I learned in that course. And I did that course on Udemy. If you've never done a course on Udemy, check them out. They're fantastic. So I can't say that going into this I've had any experience with beekeeping or building beehives or basically any of the stuff that I've done over the past year with the farm. No experience. This stuff has never crossed the arc of my life in any way. So I didn't want to spend $1,000 on a beehive in case something happened, in case something went wrong in the build, in case I did something wrong and the bees didn't survive, in case in my area of central New York it's just not conducive for having bees, which I know isn't the case because there's a lot of private companies and businesses around me that have beehives, sell honey, and make those products. So anyway, just do your research if you're going to be buying one of these yourself. So here we are transitioning to the roof piece. This is a gabled roof, and of course it comes with both end pieces of the roof as well as the side frames, and just like every other piece, they only go together one way, so you can't flip them upside down or anything. They only fit in one particular direction. So just like every other piece of this beehive, I have glued it, then I screwed it together, and onward. Most of the videos on YouTube that show the assembly of these things, they all show the use of clamps, and a clamp would really come in handy for pieces especially like this one. I don't have any long clamps though, so it is doable without. Now we're on to the individual roof pieces, or the shingles if you will, I guess. And just like everything else, I have applied a generous bead of glue, and then using the holes provided in these horizontal pieces, I just measured and I installed them. Now as you're watching this, I hope you notice something that I did not notice until too late. I was so excited to get this all put together, I didn't realize that I put these horizontal pieces upside down. So instead of the rain washing off of them, the rain would collect on literally every single ridge. So I went through and I assembled this entire roof section. Not only did I assemble the roof section, but I then went through and I filled all the holes and I sanded everything, and I was just about to do some priming when I realized, crap, I put everything on upside down. So we're going to address that a little bit too late in just a second. And this is a good segue into our next topic about potentially caulking seams, because as I was filling the holes, I was looking at where the seams are and how this isn't exactly waterproof as it is right now, and I was thinking that I should probably caulk some of the seams and gaps. So if you are going to be painting your beehive, assess where the seams are and where the openings are, if there's any damaged wood pieces, and you may want to caulk. So here we go, the grand disassembly through the filled wood of everything I had already done. I looked at this for about 30 seconds and tried to figure out how I could fix this without taking it all apart, but in the end everything had to be flipped around. So I unscrewed both sides, I flipped all the pieces around upside down the proper way so that water sheds off the roof without collecting, and then I applied some glue and I screwed everything back together for the second time. The second time, everything lined up much like it did the first time, and we were off. Now here's where I made my second mistake, and it has to do with paint. So I chose this color called Gold Abundance by Valspar. It's an exterior rated paint that I chose, and I figured that since it was a paint and primer in one combo, that it would cover nicely. And it didn't. As soon as I put the first pass of the brush across the wood, I realized that this would require probably 8 or 9 coats of paint. So I went through and I gave this entire box a first coat of paint, and I'm very happy with the color. I wanted this to look like a creative beehive. Part of the fun of buying these beehives, according to all the websites and all the videos you watch, is decorating them. So I'm of course going with a yellow and black theme, but I painted the entire thing, and I figured once this first coat of paint was dry, I could reassess the situation and pivot. Halfway through this box, I already realized that I would be taking another trip to Lowe's and buying a can of primer. So, lesson learned, and a good point to pass on to all of you, since I'm now an expert at creating beehives, apparently, is to make sure you prime your beehive, because this cedar is very sappy, and even a paint and primer in one combo just didn't do a great job. So I went through and I sanded everything, then I got a little roller and I started the process of painting or priming everything. Every single piece of wood that came with this kit, I sanded and I primed. This was, of course, a multi-day effort. I did one side one day, I flipped it over, I did the other side the next day, and then the same thing for the finish coats of paint. It took multiple days. All in all, this project took me about 7 hours to do start to finish. I had roughly 7 hours of video captured from this. But this was over the course of about 2.5 weeks. So you saw the base being painted, you saw all of these individual pieces of wood being painted, you saw the boxes being painted, and now once all this primer dries, it's time to do the finish coats. I decided that for the roof I wanted to do something unique. I didn't want to paint it yellow like everything else. I also didn't want to paint it black because that would increase the temperature inside the box, and I didn't want the bees to suffer the heat of summer. So I went with a happy medium gray instead, but you'll see that as we get to the finish coats. Every piece of wood that was touched in the process of priming got 2 full coats of primer, and in some places caulk and additional primer. Like most projects, I was very excited to get to the painting stage. I really wanted to see what this entire assembly was going to look like painted yellow. And from the moment that I put this roller across this primed wood, I knew that priming the wood first was the way to go. I only had to give each of these yellow pieces 2 coats of paint with the roller, whereas the original box that didn't get primer initially probably would have taken 8 or 9 coats, but I did reprime over that yellow box that I did not prime initially, and then I gave it 2 coats of yellow paint, just like everything else. These boxes and all of the other parts of this beehive are strikingly bright with this yellow paint. This was a really cool decision. This will reflect the heat of the summer. The sun will reflect off of it, and you're definitely going to be able to see it from a distance. One other bit of information about painting: according to the instructions as well as all the videos that I watched on the internet, they recommend that you do not paint the inside. If you are going to do anything with the inside, they say make sure that it's either food grade or it's all natural, but they recommend leaving it unpainted. So with all the coats of paint done and everything dry, it's time to dry fit all of this beehive. There's a very specific order in which everything has to go together. And once together, I wanted to do some decorating. I didn't want to leave this completely yellow. So I did a few walkarounds. I just looked at it. And it really is a cool design, and there's a lot of surface area, which makes for a great canvas to do some creative stuff. So what I did is I went into Photoshop and I created a couple designs to put on the sides of the beehive. I have a very small projector, and I set the projector up facing the beehive, projecting the graphic that I created. And with the projector facing the beehive, all I had to do was go through and trace this design with a Sharpie marker. And that's what I did. I did this on both sides, and it took forever. But once it was done, I had a very cool design that I then got to paint. So everything came apart, and now it's time to get creative. I went to our local dollar store and I got a few packs of art brushes. They're pretty fine. And I grabbed some of my Rust-Oleum gloss black paint, and I spent the next several hours going through and filling in all of the outlines that I created through the use of the projector. Now, this absolutely will not win any art contests. These brushes are not great. The Rust-Oleum is super thick. The coverage was very difficult, as anybody who's worked with Rust-Oleum knows. But from a distance, it looks cool. It was a fun process, and it gives the beehive a little bit of character. Painting the honeycomb, however, was a pain, because the honeycomb spanned all of the individual pieces that made up the beehive, including these small little pieces. So everything had to line up, and I had to make sure to stay in the lines to complete all of the different little pieces of the design. Otherwise, once it was put back together, it just wouldn't look right if everything didn't line up. But the real headache here was using these super fine brushes and this really thick Rust-Oleum paint to fill in these very large beehive structures. So I guess the only thing that you can do is put on some music and just get going. And I spent probably 3.5 hours tracing honeycombs and filling them in with black Rust-Oleum. In the end, it was a very striking look. It looked pretty cool. I did have to give this, unfortunately, 2 coats of paint, so I did have to suffer through this twice. This kit also comes with some hardware such as knobs and some little flap pieces of wood, and I ended up spray painting all of these black. So the black hardware on top of the yellow pieces of wood just emphasized the creative look of the black honeycomb and the entire black and yellow theme. On Amazon, I also bought some of these cool little epoxy bees and some E6000 glue. And I glued these little bees all over the outside of the beehive, making sure to stay away from certain key areas. But I thought this was just a fun and quirky addition that just added a little bit of extra character. They were super easy to put on. They came in 3 different sizes, and for the grand total of, I think, $6 that it cost between the small decorative epoxy bees and the glue, it was well worth it. The final thing to do was really just to add these clasps that hold the windows shut and some of the additional hardware. As you would imagine, these things are meant to turn, so you can't screw them all the way down tight. You have to leave them a little bit loose, but tight enough so that it holds the covers of the windows tightly in place. All of this stuff has to survive rain and snow and wind, so you want to make sure that it's tight enough not to release any of these pieces. This beehive has lots of layers, and one thing that I noticed is that there wasn't really anything holding the different layers together. Now I know that bees add weight, but I decided to go on Amazon and buy these clips. And these things I'm going to put around the beehive in order to clip the different layers together. And you can adjust the screw on here to tighten them and really hold it down. What I don't want to happen is some central New York wind to come through and separate the beehive. Now, since I didn't really do a good job of showing how the beehive actually goes together, there's a base, then there is the main box where you put your colony, and then there's a queen excluder, and then on top of the queen excluder is the super, which is where the honey is made. And then on top of the super is just another separator, which is a screen. It basically keeps the bees in. And then on top of this screen is the roof section, which provides ventilation to the rest of the hive. So that's it. Everything fits together, and that's the finished product. Now you can see how this is kind of wobbly and loose, and how nothing really holds any of the pieces together, where those clips come in handy. Aside from some finishing artwork that's going to go on this before it gets brought to the farm this summer, I think the overall product here came out really nice. For my first beehive, I think this is a pretty cool beehive. The artwork came out halfway decent. The little resin epoxy bees look cool on there. The black hardware kind of adds a nice touch to it. The gray roof looks pretty cool. And I think those metal clips are really going to help add a peace of mind to this. The removable pieces come off fairly easily and allow access to the inner workings of the flow units. Speaking of the flow units, I wanted to save the best for last. These are the flow frames. You can see they're split down the center. There's a left-hand side and a right-hand side, and this little removable clip up top is where the tool gets inserted to separate the honeycomb. And as you look at this, you can clearly see that each honeycomb cell is made of two parts slightly offset. By turning the key, it aligns those, and the bees are then able to create their beeswax and fill them with honey. And these things just go in side by side. They fit very snugly front to back and also side to side. There's really no leftover space in this top box. Seven flow frames. That's a lot of honey. I'm very excited about it. So now you can see the collection area toward the bottom. But each of these little clips up top comes out. That's where the tool goes in. And then the face of this area is covered by a small piece of wood that's clipped in. You could see the bees working here. You could see the little honeycombs fill with honey. And then all you do is remove one of these lower plugs, and it comes with tubes that allow you to divert the honey into a bucket. So that's it. That's my video on assembling my very first beehive. I can't wait to bring this to the farm I can't wait to get my first colony of bees and show you what that process looks like. I think that'll be something very exciting to experience this summer. But that's all for this video. We'll see you on the next one.